Welcome to our new class about World War II, and today we are going to talk about the third stage of World War II. We have to say that on June 22nd, 1941, the World War of 1939 entered its third stage when Hitler launched a massive attack upon the Soviet Union. Why he undertook such a gamble still involved in the war with Great Britain? Well, this is something that may never be fully explained. A few of the reasons, however, are fairly obvious. For years, he had looked with covetous eyes upon the riches of the Soviet Union. In the first edition of the book Mein Kampf, remember the book he wrote when he was in prison, when he was arrested after the Munich Putsch. He wrote this Mein Kampf, and here he declared that Germany should expand by and large only at the expense of Russia. He even described how Germans would swim in plenty if their country could gain possessions of the wheatlands and mineral of the Ukraine region. So he decided to start this attack, to launch this attack. It was called Operation Barbarossa. The attack was begun before daylight on June 22nd, 1941, along the entire frontier between the two countries. By September the 8th, he had reached the banks of the Neva River and had begun the siege of Leningrad. About November the 20th, however, they started a new offensive which threatened the encirclement of Moscow. Nazi columns penetrated even near the capital, yet Moscow did not fall. Hundreds of thousands of Russians were killed, wounded, or captured. In the north, the Germans were besieging Leningrad, and in the center, they had captured Smolensk. Hitler now had a choice. He had two options. He could capture Moscow, or he could seize the Ukraine with all its industries and its rich farmland. Incredibly, he wasted a whole month making up his mind. When he finally decided what to do, he decided to take the Ukraine, which his armies did quite quickly, advancing as far as Rostov. Hitler then ordered an assault on Moscow. By now, though, the winter had begun, and Marshal Zhukov mounted a counterattack and hurled the Germans back from the capital. How were the Russians able to defeat the Nazis if many countries had failed? Well, we have to say that the Red Army commanders were able to take advantage of the vast space of their country in order to draw the Germans further and further from their supply bases. And obviously, as they were further and further from their supply bases, they started to suffer from starvation because they couldn't come back. And in that way, the Russian commanders could organize a powerful counter-offensive. They also benefited from the mistakes of the Nazis, especially from Hitler. Hitler admitted that he had greatly underestimated the strength of the Soviets, especially the Red Army. Besides, the strategy of the entire campaign was conceived in such a way as to limit his chances of victory. So he did everything in order, obviously, it was not on purpose, but he limited his own chances of victory. For example, instead of concentrating only on vital objectives, he dispersed his forces along the long frontier of the country of the Soviet Union. But these were not the only factors. The Soviet leaders had been preparing for war for a long time. If you remember the Nazi-Soviet Pact, in the Nazi-Soviet Pact, Stalin knew that one day Germany was going to attack. So he studied the German tactics in war, and he prepared with armaments to face this advance of the Germans that obviously he knew it was going to come. When the Germans reached Leningrad and Moscow in September 1941, they could not go any further. The Red Army fought fiercely. But another aspect to take into account is the Russian winter. In November, the dreaded Russian winter arrived. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. It snowed and snowed. The Germans did not have proper boots or warm clothes to keep out the winter cold. They wanted to retreat, but Hitler forbade it, and German soldiers froze to death at their posts. After the winter, Hitler himself took control of the army and pulled troops away from Moscow, sending them to Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, one of the greatest and most horrible battles of the war, was at the point of starting. So the Battle of Stalingrad began. It started in September 1942 and finished in January 1943. Despite all the reforms of the Red Army, 1942 began badly for the Soviet Union. The Germans made further advances, and attempts by the Red Army to push them back led to a further 500,000 casualties. When Hitler decided to strike towards the Caucasus Mountains and to capture the USSR oil fields, the Red Army generals knew they had at all costs to halt the German advance at Stalingrad on the Volga River. Stalingrad was a major industrial and strategic center. If the Germans seized Stalingrad, they could cut the Soviet Union links with southern Russia. The Germans reached the suburbs of Stalingrad despite fierce resistance by the Soviet forces. It became a savage hand-to-hand battle, and in the street fighting, the Germans' tanks were of little use. The Germans held on greenly, but on November the 19th, when the Soviet commander Zhukov counterattacked in pincer movements north and south of the city, part of the German army was encircled. Outnumbered, the German commander Polos wanted to retreat and link up with reinforcements, but Hitler ordered him to fight on. Soviet air power gradually cut off supplies. Soviet artillery, well supplied with shells, pounded the German positions, and another new weapon, the Katyusha rocket launcher, rained down explosives on them. By December, the German positions was hopeless, and Polos finally surrendered on January the 31st, 1943, along with 300,000 soldiers. But this was not, although this is considered one of the last battles of World War II in the Eastern Front, there was even another battle which was maybe as important as the Stalingrad battle. Still, it was the Battle of Kursk, which was fought between July and August in 1943. Why? Because when Germany was defeated in Stalingrad, there were still German soldiers in the Soviet Union. So they hoped to counterattack, and they launched a huge counterattack against the Red Army at Kursk. The Germans had planned a surprise attack, but what happened? The Red Army intelligence already knew about this counterattack. They destroyed the Germans. The Soviets had vast numbers of their highly effective T-34 tanks, which were the tanks that they produced. They had 10 times as many aircraft as the Germans, and this new aircraft was very similar to the German Luftwaffe. Even more, they had ground attack aircraft which fire anti-tank rockets. By this time, the Soviet factories were producing the maximum number of tanks and armaments, and they could quickly replace the tanks and the armament lost in battles. The Germans, on the other hand, were not able to replace lost tanks and aircraft quickly enough. German production could not increase because of American and British bombing of German factories, and obviously they were in disadvantage. Finally, Kursk was the turning point in the war in the Eastern Front. It was the start of German retreat. The German siege of Leningrad, which began in 1941, was finally lifted in January 1944. By August 1944, the Red Army had reached Poland, and this began with the final defeat of Germany in World War II. This is the end of this class. See you in our next class. Bye-bye.